to shift us back to, the uncomfortable conversations again. What if you find yourself in a conversation with someone and now let's open this up. You're talking to your dentist. You're talking to, a neighbor walking their dog. It can be anyone. And what if they are uncomfortable or they're talking about, challenging or banning or censoring a book that you also don't like or you don't really care for? How do you approach that?
So yeah, I have been just thinking about this because I think as human beings, and I think based on some of these questions we've seen in the Q&A, a lot of us are thinking about how our beliefs impact other people around us. And so if I've had someone say to me like, "Oh, I'm so glad they got rid of this book." And in my heart, I am like, "Me too," because I don't want to read that book either. Um, but I think it's another example of a time when it's really important to pause and reflect on the broader implications of a choice like that. So, there's been a lot of change in school curriculum to a modernize the canon that students are reading and learning from because the world has changed. And some book I personally have been very happy to see, move on. And so I was thinking about what I would do in this situation. And I think two things that are anchoring me down are that intellectual freedom is not a one-way street. So just because somebody wants to ban a book that I also don't like, that is still censorship, and that is going against something that I really believe in my core to be a, a, a civil right to have access to information. And um, so so I think just remembering that, intellectual freedom goes both ways. Sometimes you disagree, sometimes you agree. Um, People have an example that's been used to counter genderqueer that I've seen frequently is the Bible, because the Bible includes all kinds of topics that parents have listed as concerns in genderqueer. And but it's not a concern in the Bible. So those kinds of things, it's just really important to remember that all ideas have a place and you don't have to agree with it. And what an opportunity if a patron borrows a book that you also don't like, and they're like, "I'm going to read this because I heard that this book said this, and I want to know what this is about." That's an opportunity to say, you know, like, does this author have the right to publish their opinion of, and if a publisher, like, there are so many layers of things that happen to a book before it ever even gets to a library. Like, somebody somewhere along the line has read this book and said, this is a publishable piece of work. Um, so just remembering that, like, the author is entitled to have their opinion, to write their opinion, and people are entitled to consume that information if they choose to. So um, yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. And then as a librarian, I also think a lot about self-censorship, because sometimes books come out that I am like, I don't want to buy that book because I vehemently disagree with this as a matter of principle. I think this person's opinion is wrong. I think it's based in a conspiracy theory or something that's not true. And it is tempting, or I want to avoid a conflict. So I'm not, if I were a high school librarian and I said, I'm not going to buy genderqueer because I don't want to have to deal with people challenging that book and causing problems. So I think, especially lately, librarians are thinking a lot about self censorship and thinking of Heather's question that she just talked about. Who is my community and what do they want to read? And whether or not I like it is really not my job as a librarian. My job is to assess materials and provide my community with what they're asking for, and to be nimble and change when those needs change, because communities are living beings and they're changing all the time. So I guess that was kind of what I was thinking if I got approached about banning a book that I also didn't like.
If I could keep going with the intellectual freedom thread for a second, just for, I don't know if that's more library jargon, but just for those who aren't librarians, it's the right to hold, receive, and disseminate ideas without restriction. So everyone is welcome to receive information on any topic they want to. And I can share that the Maine Library Association, we have an intellectual freedom committee, and they will work with a lot of libraries and librarians who are facing challenges and write letters of support or come to school board meetings, however we can help these. And there was a challenge last year with a book that many of us on the committee and the executive board did not find to be something that we personally would want to read. It offended our personal points of views, but we still wrote a letter to the board and said that we did not think that book should be banned because of intellectual freedom. So even though all of us found the book to be distasteful, we still thought that if that director bought that book and it had its place on that library shelf, there was no reason that it should be taken off. So intellectual freedom, as Savannah said, does go both ways. And I just wanted to share that's how that happens in practice too, and hopefully most cases.
And earlier, Susan brought up the point of policies, and I think this is another example of why it's really worthwhile to go through your collection policy and set objectives that are available for anyone to look at. And when something comes up as a challenge, if you point them to reference the policy, if it's well done, you can, even I have gone back to read my own policies before and be like, okay, you got to accept it because it is within, my policy.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not very fun or exciting to think about, but it really is a useful tool.
Well, a policy represents the thinking of other people, and this gives me a chance to say you don't have to go it alone. It doesn't have to be just your decision. And if anybody is faced with a decision to buy a book or not, or have a difficult conversation, you don't have to go it alone. Check in with somebody else. It can be so helpful to have a colleague, or a policy represents, opinions of a larger group of people, a board, a friend. Hey, do you think I should talk with this person? Hey, can I try out some ideas on you first before I go have this harder conversation? I'm just reminding us that we never have to go it alone.
And actually, we have an audience question that moves us a little bit away from that, but I think it's interesting, given how you all are talking about policy. But for an everyday person who isn't a librarian, who isn't working in a library, how might they handle a situation where someone is complaining about books that are in either a school or a public library that have potentially controversial topics that they maybe don't want their community or their family or children, in the community exposed to? They believe that there's a role for society to protect, the community, other children from these topics or from these ideas. How do you address that idea?
I make a distinction between misinformation, so actually things that are untrue and are going to be harmful in that way, and different perspectives and opinions, right? So especially in a school library, I don't want to have people misinformed. So that's where I think of protecting my patrons and my readers. another librarian I know recently pointed out in a school board meeting that in libraries, we don't force anybody to check books out. We offer the information as a choice and as options, but we're never forcing it on people.
The other thing that I was thinking about with this question is, you know, what is the mission of your institution, whatever it is, a school library, a public library, and while someone may feel that it's not, that whatever the item is or the subject is not appropriate at any particular time, if the mission of your institution is to provide access to information, then again, to Heather's point, we're not forcing you to come in and look at that, but we are fulfilling our mission to be a place where people can find information.
As a former educator, just quickly, you know, I thought a lot about the loss of so many local newspapers over the years. And I recall in school, we often would get the local paper and we would either write article summaries, but we were interacting with the newspaper in a way that I think many of us have a strong foundation of what is news, what is opinion. And I think there's been some loss of that over time. And that's where it gets a little gray, where it's like, well, this book to me has misinformation, but the misinformation is being expressed as an opinion. And people are entitled to have a misinformed opinion, as frustrating and painful as that can be, you know. And I'm not saying that libraries should be collecting books full of misinformation, but we know as we've collected the book that this is an opinion. This is, you know, a memoir, or you know, just somebody's philosophy. I'm not smart enough or qualified enough to police everyone on earth what they believe and what they put in a book. So yeah, I think about that layer as well.
The other thing is we are still a democratic society, you know. We are founded on multi lingual, multi-discipline, multi-heritage. And so your particular belief system is perfectly acceptable in this country. Where we run into problems is when you say, I can't see it or hear it or use it. That's what democracy is. It's messy.
And I think also when you're talking about children, I'm a parent, so I watch what my child reads and I help him pick out books, and I have the right to guide his decisions, but I don't have the right to decide what other parents can have access to for their children. We all have different lives, different situations affecting us, and what my family may not need to read, another child might need to read about that situation or scenario, and it could be life-changing for them.